I got home on a Thursday instead of Friday because the client's system crashed in the middle of our training session and there was nothing left for me to fix. My flight was bumped up, my suitcase was lighter than when I'd left, and all I could think about on the Uber ride from the airport was how nice it would be to crash into my own bed a night early, into my own husband, and not another beige hotel pillow that smelled vaguely like industrial detergent. I texted George from the airport, just a little airplane emoji and a heart, then decided not to tell him I'd made it onto the earlier flight. The idea of surprising him felt fun. We'd been passing each other like coworkers lately, leaving each other notes on the fridge instead of real conversations, and I'd started to miss him the way you miss someone who lives in another city, not across the hall. It was just after 9 when I unlocked the front door. The house was dark except for a soft lamp glow leaking down the hall from our bedroom. That was the first clue something was off. George never used the lamp. He always went full overhead interrogation mode unless I nagged him about ambiance. The second clue was the giggling. Not his normal laugh, that loud, full-bodied wheeze he got when a stand-up clip really hit him, but something lighter, breathy, and doubled. 2 voices. One of them his. I froze in the entryway with my roller bag still standing upright beside me, the wheels smudged from airport floors. For a second, I thought maybe he had the TV on, some sitcom rerun with a laugh track. But then I heard my name, warped and half-swallowed in amusement. "No, Leah would absolutely roast you for that," came a familiar male voice. Brendan. His gaming buddy. The guy whose name I'd heard more in the last 6 months than some of our actual friends, always through George's headset, muffled by doorways. Brendan, who lived like 20 minutes away, but somehow never materialized in our real social life, only in the online worlds they shared. My skin prickled. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe they were playing something stupid and loud, and he'd forgotten to mention Brendan was coming over in person instead of just being disembodied in his headphones. Maybe it was totally normal. Maybe. I slipped off my shoes and left my suitcase by the door, automatically quiet. The closer I got to the bedroom, the more obvious it was that there were no controllers clicking, no game sounds spilling out from the TV. Just low voices, a stifled laugh, the faint rustle of fabric and something brushing the wall. I stopped just outside the door. It was open a few inches, enough for a triangular slice of light to cut across the hallway. My hand hovered near the frame. I considered knocking, announcing myself like a guest in my own house. Instead, I leaned forward and looked in. I've replayed that decision so many times since. How I didn't knock, how I didn't call out, how I chose to look. What would have happened if I'd barged in noisily, or if I'd backed away and pretended I'd never heard anything? Maybe everything. Maybe nothing. But in that moment, curiosity was heavier than caution. The scene inside didn't make sense at first. It was like my brain tried to slot what I saw into old, familiar patterns and kept failing. The bed, unmade. Our gray duvet pushed toward the footboard. The TV on the dresser, muted. A paused anime frame frozen mid-expression. And on the bed, in the soft yellow light of the lamp, were 2 figures curled toward each other. George was facing me in profile, his eyes closed, lips parted in a soft, slow kiss. The person he was kissing, Brendan, I realized with a jolt, had one hand cupping George's cheek, thumb stroking just beneath his ear. Their bodies were almost tangled, thighs pressed together, knees touching. They were both wearing nightgowns. Not my nightgowns. I own a few cotton numbers, cute, practical, aggressively unsexy according to last year's Valentine's Day conversation. These were not those. These were satin, or silk, something that caught the light and flowed like water when they shifted. George's was a pale champagne color, cut just above the knee with thin straps that showed more of his shoulders than I'd ever seen outside of a tank top. Brendan's was a soft, dusty rose, slightly longer, the hem brushing against sheer tights that glinted faintly where the lamplight hit them. Both of them, My husband and his bro were in sheer tights. I watched the fabric stretch delicately over George's calves as he shifted his legs, seeking a more comfortable nest against Brendan's body. My first thought was wildly inappropriate for a wife catching her husband kissing someone else. They're beautiful. My second was a flare of betrayal so bright it made my eyes sting. How long? How long had this been happening while I was sleeping in hotel beds and reheating leftovers? I knew I should leave. That's what all the advice columns say. You see something you're not meant to see, you back out. You give yourself space to think. You confront later with words, not whatever raw noise wanted to tear itself out of your throat. I didn't leave. I stood there, frozen, watching them kiss. It wasn't frantic or secretive or the kind of grinding desperation you'd expect from an affair caught mid-something. It was slow, tender. George sighed into Brendan's mouth, his shoulders loosening, his fingers relaxing where they rested against Brendan's chest. Brendan's other hand slid up to the nape of George's neck, fingers disappearing into his hair, as though he'd done this enough times to know exactly where to go. My cheeks burned. Part of it was the humiliation. This wasn't a movie. I was not supposed to be the wife in the doorway. Part of it was anger, the sharp, metallic taste of it at the back of my throat. And part of it was something else, a low, warm ache I didn't want to name, my heart tripping over itself at the sight of satin on George's shoulders, the curve of Brendan's thigh under that rose-colored hem, the softness of their bodies folded together. Something in me thought, traitorously, I want to be on that bed. Somewhere between one kiss and the next, Brendan's eyes flicked open. They landed on me like a spotlight. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other, me in the doorway gripping the frame hard enough for my knuckles to go white, him with my husband's mouth still pressed to his. Then he jerked back. "George," he hissed, breathless. "George, stop." George pulled away, blinking, a smear of lipstick. Their lipstick? Glossing his lower lip. He turned his head and followed Brendan's gaze. Our eyes met. I've known George for 10 years. I've seen his face in every mood. Goofy, exhausted, hungover, blissed out on good food. I had never seen it like that. Caught between terror and relief and something that, later, I would realize was a strange kind of resignation. "Leah," he breathed. My name, in that tone, hurt worse than if he'd said nothing. None of us moved for a second. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, absurdly loud. Finally, I found my voice. I said. My mouth was dry. "I caught an earlier flight." It was a stupid sentence, the stupidest. Of all the things I could have led with, that was the one that came out. Brendan made a choked noise that might have been a laugh, or a sob, or both. George struggled upright, the satin of his nightgown sliding over his thighs. The sight of it short-circuited my brain again. He yanked the hem down automatically, as if it made a difference now. "Leah, I can explain," he started. "You really, really can't," I said. And then to my horror, I laughed. It sounded high and unhinged, at least not in a way that makes this magic trick disappear. Brendan sat up more slowly, his pale tights catching on the bedspread. Up close, the silk of his nightgown was patterned with tiny embroidered flowers. My knees felt weak. I gripped the doorframe harder. I began, and stopped. Leave? Cry? Throw something? Walk dramatically out of the house and drive aimlessly until my brain cooled down? "Maybe you should sit," Brendan offered, voice oddly gentle. "You look like you might pass out." I shot him a look that was probably more startled than angry. He was right. The hallway felt like it was tilting. "Yeah," George said quickly. "Leah, please, come in. We need to talk. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way." "Was there a better way?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "Like, I don't know, maybe any way that involved you talking at all?" His expression crumpled. "I deserve that," he said. "I deserve worse than that. But can we do this in the same room at least?" I thought about it. The fight or flight part of me screamed flight, but another, deeper part, the one that had watched them kissing for far too long, nodded. I stepped into the room, closing the door behind me more out of habit than intention. My suitcase and shoes were still in the hallway, evidence that I'd come home expecting a completely different night. I sat down on the little upholstered bench at the end of the bed, as far from them as I could be while still technically sharing furniture. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Okay," I said. "Talk." George exchanged a look with Brendan, who gave the smallest of nods, like a director signaling an actor to hit his mark. "You know how I met Brendan through the game," George began. "League nights," I said faintly. "Headsets. Yelling." "Right," he said. "At first it was just that. Jokes and strategy and complaining about lag. But we started DMing more. About other stuff. Work, family, you, me." "Me," I repeated. "Great." "Not in a bad way," Brendan cut in quickly. "Mostly him bragging that he married a woman who can actually fix the Wi-Fi and quotes sci-fi movies without checking IMDb. Despite everything, a corner of my mouth twitched. "Flattery noted," I said. "Continue, George." He took a deep breath. "I've always liked certain things," he said, gesturing awkwardly at the gown. "Clothes, textures, the idea of softness. But I grew up in a place where that wasn't exactly encouraged, so I boxed it up in my head, wrote it off as a weird teenage phase. Then Brendan mentioned one night when we were both up way too late that he used to try on his sister's dresses in high school, just casually, like it was the weather." "I overshared," Brendan said, grimacing. "Like I do." "He didn't overshare," George said quietly. "He cracked something open for me. And then we just kept talking about gender and clothes and what makes us feel like ourselves. We realized we had this overlap, this place where we weren't just dude gamers, but something blurrier, softer." I thought of the way they'd been curled around each other when I walked in. Blurrier, softer. Yeah. "So you started playing dress-up," I said. "And kissing." My voice wobbled on the last word. Brendan flinched, then straightened. "The kissing came later," he said, as though the order mattered. Maybe it did. "We hung out a few times first, IRL. No satiny antics. Just coffee and trash talking and trying to see if we got along outside a headset. We did. Too well, maybe. Then last month," George said, "when you were on your last trip, Brendan came over for a movie. We'd been messaging about maybe trying things, clothes, seeing what it felt like, not just in theory. He brought this box with him." Brendan held up a hand, palm out. "And just to be crystal clear, I told him he needed to tell you. I'm not interested in being the secret anything." "I know," George said miserably. "I was going to. I kept rehearsing in my head. Hey, Leah, what if sometimes I wore something silky in bed that wasn't yours?" "You really need a better scriptwriter," I muttered. "I know," he said again. "But every time I imagined your face, I panicked." I convinced myself I would tell you after we figured out what it meant. After we tried it a few times. After. And then this. He gestured helplessly at the nightgowns, the bed, me. "So you've been doing this, what, the whole time I've been traveling?" I asked. "Just once before tonight," Brendan said quietly. "I swear. And we kissed a little. We mostly just lay there like you saw, being small spoon for once, instead of human wall." George nodded, eyes wide and earnest. "I wasn't planning on escalating," he said. "I just liked feeling held. Liked feeling like I didn't have to be husband-shaped, you know? The words hit somewhere behind my sternum. I thought about all the times he'd pulled me against his chest automatically. The way he always reached out to hold me, not the other way around. How rarely he let himself feel fragile in front of me. How often I'd been the one unraveling from stress while he stayed steady, solid. "Why didn't you think you could ask me to do that?" I asked quietly. "To hold you. In silk, if that's what you want. Why did Brendan get that part of you and not me?" His face crumpled again, and this time, tears slipped free. "Because I was afraid you'd see me differently," he said. "That you'd think I wanted to be someone else, or with someone else, or that I wasn't enough for you as I am. Which is ironic, because now you see all of it anyway, and I still managed to hurt you." I swallowed against the knot in my throat. "You have hurt me," I said. "I feel cheated on. Even if there hasn't been more, even if it's mostly cuddling and clothes. You gave something intimate to someone else without letting me choose whether I was okay with that." "I know," he said, voice hoarse. "I'm so sorry." "And you," I said, turning to Brendan, "what is this for you? Are you in love with my husband?" He met my gaze without flinching. "I care about him a lot," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise. There's affection, yeah. Attraction, too. But I never planned on taking him away from you. I pushed him to talk to you. I backed off when he said he couldn't. Tonight was honestly supposed to be a conversation session, not a dress-up one. We just got comfortable. Too comfortable." A wry smile tugged at his mouth. "Clearly." Silence settled again. The three of us sat there, all breathing the same slightly stale bedroom air, the lamp humming faintly. I realized my cheeks were still hot, not just from anger. When I closed my eyes, the picture that floated up was not me storming out or kicking Brendan to the curb. It was the three of us on the bed, satin and cotton and limbs tangled, laughing at how ridiculous and tender we all were. I opened my eyes quickly. "There's something else you should know," I said, surprising myself. "This isn't entirely new territory for my brain." George blinked. "What do you mean?" I looked down at my hands. "In college," I said, "I had a thing with a girl. Well, a person. They were figuring out gender stuff. We cuddled a lot, kissed some, nothing more. It felt soft, different. I liked it. I also liked my boyfriend at the time. I told myself it was a phase, that I'd grow out of it. But seeing you two," I shrugged helplessly. "It didn't just hurt. It stirred something up." Brendan's expression softened. "You're allowed to be complicated too," he said. I shot him a glare, but it lacked heat. "Don't therapize me in my own bedroom," I said. "You're still wearing stolen softness." He glanced down at his nightgown. "Fair," he said. "For what it's worth, I brought all the clothes," he added. "George asked me to. He didn't go rifling through your drawers or anything." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was a small thing, but it mattered. "So what now?" I asked. "What do we do with this?" "Whatever you want," George said immediately. "If that means Brendan leaves and never comes back and I burn the nightgowns and spend the rest of my life proving to you that you're enough and I'm not going anywhere, then that's what I'll do. If it means something else, we can talk about it. But the choice has to be yours now. I took it away from you before." My stomach twisted at the idea of him burning anything, especially the part of himself that had looked so peaceful in satin a few minutes ago. "I don't want you to erase yourself," I said slowly. "I just don't know if I can share." Brendan shifted, the bed creaking. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said. "Or at all. If me being here in that way hurts you, I step back. That's not up for debate." His certainty surprised me. This wasn't the selfish homewrecker character my hurt had been trying to cast him as. He was a person. A scared, satin-clad person who looked like he might cry any second. What if... The words felt like stepping onto ice. What if this isn't a binary? All or nothing. Burn the gowns or move in together. George huffed out a startled laugh. "I hadn't even let myself imagine a version where you didn't immediately leave me," he admitted. "So, yeah. I'm open to middle options." My heart thudded. "I don't know what I'm proposing," I said quickly. "I'm not making promises. When I saw you two, yes, my stomach dropped, but also, I couldn't look away. Part of me was jealous. Not just of the cheating aspect, jealous of you, Brendan. Because you got to see George like that. And jealous of you, George, because you got to feel that kind of softness without worrying about whether it made you less of anything." Brendan's eyes flicked between us. "We could," he began, then stopped. "No, that's probably too much." "Say it," I said. "If I had to sit in this discomfort, they could too." "We could have a sleepover," he said, cheeks flushing. "All three of us. Not like..." He waved a hand. "Not like a porn plot, just pajamas, movies, maybe clothes if people feel like it. You at the center of it, Leah. You setting the boundaries. You seeing in person that this isn't about replacing you. It's about expanding what comfort looks like for all of us." My pulse raced. The mental image that sprang up, me in my favorite soft cotton pajama set, George in that champagne nightgown, Brendan in rose, all of us sprawled on the bed with popcorn, was so viscerally appealing it made me dizzy. "That sounds insane," I said, "and deeply uncomfortable. And maybe kind of wonderful. In theory." George's eyes shone with a cautious hope I hadn't seen in a long time. "We can go glacially slow," he said. "We can keep it as PG as you want. Clothes only, no kissing. Or kissing only you, or whatever. And if at any point you hate it, we stop. Full stop. No pouting, no, but we were just getting into it. I'll be grateful you even considered showing up to the weirdest party ever." "I do throw very good weird parties," I said faintly. The three of us actually smiled at that. It felt surreal, laughing there with my husband and his not-quite lover, all of us in various states of emotional undress and actual nightwear. "I need time," I said firmly. "To think. To yell at my steering wheel in the car. To maybe talk to a therapist before I start theme planning a satin sleepover." "Absolutely," Brendan said. "I will not be offended if you don't want me here while you process. I can go now if you want." I looked at him. The nightgown swished around his knees as he shifted, tights catching the light. He looked vulnerable and strange and oddly beautiful. "No," I said, surprising all of us. "You can stay. For now. We started this conversation together. We can finish it together." Relief washed over his features. "Okay," he said quietly. "Thank you." Later, after a lot more talking about labels, none of us had tidy ones, about boundaries, to be negotiated, about our shared fear of becoming a cautionary tale, we ended up switching into more familiar clothes. Brendan's jeans and t-shirt appeared from his overnight bag. George tugged on sweatpants under the nightgown for modesty's sake until I snorted and told him he looked like a confused nun, which made him laugh hard enough to break some of the lingering tension. I changed into my own pajamas in the bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror for a long time before going back out. My reflection looked the same as it had that morning in the hotel. Same brown eyes, same messy bun, same faint worry line between my brows. But I felt different. Like someone had opened a hidden door in my life and shown me a room I didn't know I'd been missing. We didn't end the night in a pile of limbs on the bed. That would have been too neat, too cinematic. Instead, Brendan left around midnight, after a hug from George that I watched closely and tried not to overinterpret. He gave me a small, respectful nod on his way out, like we'd signed a fragile treaty. George and I crawled into bed on opposite sides, then slowly inched toward the middle until our hands met. "This is not what I pictured when I thought about you surprising me," he said into the darkness. "Same," I whispered, "but I'm still here." He squeezed my fingers. "Thank you." Sleep didn't come easy. My mind kept replaying the image of them kissing, the shimmer of satin, the look on George's face when he'd realized I was there. But in between the heart-pounding flashes of jealousy and hurt, something else flickered. Curiosity. About who my husband could be when he wasn't trying so hard to be what he thought he should. About who I could be when I let myself admit that my desire didn't fit neatly into one box either. A week later, after a lot of journal pages and one very intense therapy session, I texted George and Brendan a simple line. "If we do a satin sleepover, I pick the movie." 3 dots appeared from both of them almost instantly. It would be messy. It would be complicated. It would require more conversations than I'd ever imagined having about tights and feelings in the same breath. But it would be ours. And this time, I wouldn't be watching from the doorway. I'd be on the bed, in the soft, bewildering center of it all.